The protagonist begins by talking about the old walls of that place and the worn-out furniture. Some small insects pass by the fans. He invited those insects. He kills one and licks it, saying it's somewhat bitter. However, he spent his entire life in that basement. While writing, he says that when he manages to get out of this suffocating place, he will use these reflections he's writing now. Normally, in letters like this, people start by writing their name. However, he has never been called by the name he has, so he doesn't know what it is, but he is sure he must have one given by his mother. He was separated from her right after birth. However, he has this photo in his room of his mother holding him. Looking at her smile, he says he is sure she must have loved him. She is dead, that's what a guy with glasses says next to him. When the guy goes to repeat himself, he turns asking what he means by that. The guy with a sack-like chin says she died shortly after he was born, jumping off a bridge. The man keeps laughing while the protagonist does not react. This guy is actually his father, the cursed bastard who trapped him in this place. The man's plan is to never let him escape. The place is composed of several corridors and many doors, and all the keys to that place are in his waist. The father tells him not to worry, that he will never see the outside. He asks if he doesn't remember why his mother jumped off the bridge. The boy does not respond, and the man takes a cookie and moves it towards his face, saying she was scared. The world she lived in, or this land, she knew an apocalypse was coming. The boy continues to stare at his father, who warns that the reason he won't leave there is because he loves him. He doesn't want to see his son take his own life. The boy says it's a lie, it's impossible, she preferred to die than live in this so-called apocalypse. He tells him to stop lying about this apocalypse coming. The father says he can choose whether to believe it or not. He takes the notebook and warns that this letter he wrote will never see the light of day. The boy tells him to stop, but the father sets it on fire. Sometime later, on top of the trash can, he says that this guy doesn't even deserve to be called a father. However, the guy smiles, saying that he can't say something like that since everything he's been doing is for his son. He warns that the time has come and tells him to follow. Walking through the corridors, the protagonist says it's at the same time every day. They pass through this place and he doesn't hear the sound of any other form of life. He and his father are the only inhabitants of this vast basement. The father starts writing things on the blackboard while the boy thinks it's the same routine every day, the same lessons and the same training. The only thing that keeps him surviving this tedious life is the little free time he gets every day to take a look at the library. Among the numerous books there, the ones he likes the most are those that have descriptions of the world outside. He wonders what this sunlight that all the books talk about is like. At least he believes it must be warmer than the light in that basement. He looks back and sees a field. With this, he imagines himself running in it, saying he wants to experience a peaceful day in life and see a beautiful scenery. He wants to be able to talk to other people and maybe even be friends with them. But the most important thing now is to escape from this place and give his father a good kick. The father closes the book and says he has already told him that he can only read it during his free time. Watching him, he says it looks like his son was reading a book about the surface and says he continues to be pathetic. Wanting to know if he still has some kind of connection to the outside world, the father reminds him that you will never leave this place. When the apocalypse comes, the world will be covered in blood and screams. Only ashes will remain, and this place is the only way to survive. The protagonist says that his father is lying again. He always says that an apocalypse is coming, and it's because of this absurd reason that he has been trapped there his whole life. He wants to escape from this place, no matter the cost. However, the time has not come yet. He has to wait for the perfect moment, the time when his father lets his guard down and becomes defenseless. Sometime later, in one of the other rooms, the protagonist is doing push-ups, struggling. The father says it's ridiculous. He's tired just because of this, and he wouldn't survive the apocalypse like this, saying it's ridiculous that he only did 10 with that small weight on his back. The protagonist's arm loses strength, and he falls to the ground. The father approaches and offers his hand to help. He stays silent for a second, confused. Awkwardly, he asks his father why he is being helped. However, as soon as he takes his hand, the father pulls him and says he never said he would help. He sweeps his legs, making the boy roll and hit his back against the glass. The father explains once again that anyone who reaches out a hand to help cannot be trusted. In the apocalypse, humans are the most dangerous things, and that's why he's been training him and teaching him combat techniques. It will be inevitable that he encounters other humans, and when that happens, he must be strong enough to win with clean hands. However, he realizes that his son has fainted and turns away, saying the day is over. But at that moment, the protagonist finds a chance. His father was careless. He got up and grabbed a shard of glass. That was the moment he had always been looking for. His father's guard was down, and he prepared and lunged towards him. He was going to finish him off now in this careless state, obtain the key, and escape from this place. The boy approached and smiled, saying the plan worked. It was just that piece of glass touching his father, and he was about to reach it. However, there was a flaw in his plan. The father remained still, and he knew that man was not someone who would let his guard down like that. At the moment the shard was about to touch him, the father suddenly turned around. The protagonist was startled, and his father's entire body had already turned. Even so, he didn't hesitate and went for the attack, but the father easily dodged. The plan had failed. The father spun around and kicked him in the face. With that, the protagonist blacked out. Sometime later, he woke up in his room. Before he could say anything, the father said he finally woke up and noted that it was a great attempt. That attack had been very good. However, he had already warned him that he shouldn't be using any weapons, or the training meant nothing. And the penalty for trying to use that would be double training for now. He closed the room door and told him to rest because tomorrow would be a very tough day. With that, the father left. And the protagonist says there is something his father doesn't know. As soon as he turns off the light, the electricity in the room is cut for a few seconds. At that moment, if he focuses his hearing, he can hear things he had never heard before, things that are extremely distant. The sound of things spinning, the sound of birds singing, even a bustling city. Because of this, he discovered two truths. The father says it's time to sleep, but in reality, it's daytime outside. And the other truth is that the world is completely peaceful. The father traps him there because of the so-called apocalypse, but he will break free from it, no matter what happens, and thus find his mother. Every time he asks his father about her, he says she is dead. However, he already knows that his father always lies. This means that in reality, she is alive. He lies down, saying that one day he will escape from there and find her, no matter what happens. The father was walking through the corridors, laughing like a madman alone, until suddenly he received a call. His expression changed and he answered, saying that he had told them not to call unless it was an emergency. While the protagonist slept, he heard something. The call seemed to be serious and he said that it was fine, he would let him live. With that, the phone fell to the ground and the father knelt down crying. After a while, he started laughing while the protagonist was waking up. The father seemed out of his mind, laughing like a lunatic in the corner of the room. The protagonist felt that something was wrong and asked what it was. That was when he noticed he was tied to a chair. He asked what his father was doing and told him to untie him. However, he soon realized that his father didn't seem to be listening. He knew he would have to free himself from those ropes slowly. He started rubbing them together, applying pressure, and they began to break. He was confident until his father appeared in front of him and told him to stop that. The protagonist felt something strange, swallowed hard, and asked his father when they were going to start the supposed training that would be twice as hard. The father only said that plans had changed, and they wouldn't be doing any of that today. In fact, they wouldn't be doing anything anymore, and the boy would just stay in that chair. The protagonist asked what he was talking about, reminding him that he said he was being trained for the apocalypse. The father said the training was over. Now the boy had no idea why his father had changed so much, and the worst part was that he couldn't fight back if he was tied up. He started to wonder if he would really be unable to see his mother. Angrily, he resumed forcing the ropes, and the father asked what he thought he was doing. He ignored him and continued applying pressure, and the ropes began to break. The father approached, almost slack-jawed, and started laughing in his face, seeming to have transformed. Suddenly, he felt something hit him in the face. The chair fell, and the father lifted him up again, warning him not to move. The protagonist hesitated for a second, and then began to move again, taking another blow to the chest and falling to the ground. Despite having nothing to do, he kept forcing the ropes to try to free himself. The protagonist kept insisting. At that time, he didn't know what was happening to him. Maybe it would have made more sense to just agree with his father and look for another opportunity to escape. However, at that moment, there was something he didn't want to lose, even if it cost him his life: the resentment he had for his father for being trapped there. Sometime later, he broke free from the chains. Seeing that he was free made him excited. He wanted to see the look of disappointment on his father's face for not obeying. However, as soon as he turned, his father was coming again. He imagined his father would have a look of rage, but as he got closer, he noticed something was different. What he saw in front of him were tears that his father had always been holding back. It was then that he realized that this man had always been extremely sad. This made him wonder why this damned man had such an expression at that moment. With that, he was struck and lost consciousness, with his father saying he hoped he understood. The lessons were always the same. His father talked about the rules for surviving the apocalypse, and the most important one was never to leave the basement. There would be no safer place in the world than that. Defense mechanisms that would be maintained for 126 years, resources and supplies enough for anyone to stay alive. That place had everything prepared, and leaving it was asking to die. The father warned that the end would come without any warning, so he was not to leave. The protagonist woke up face down on the floor. When he regained consciousness, his father had disappeared and left him behind. That had never happened before. The only time he didn't see his father was when he slept. However, remembering his father's crying expression, he knew something was happening. He had become accustomed to the repetitive days in that place, but that day was different from all the others in his life. He instinctively knew that something was about to begin. As if his intuition could be heard, the doors to all the rooms opened at that moment. The boy didn't hesitate for a second. As soon as the doors opened, he saw an opportunity for the first time in his life. He went through the doors and started advancing through the corridors. In a certain area, he knew that if his father were there, he would have been stopped. But this confirmed that his father was not there. All the barriers were deactivated, so he ran until he found the staircase. He knew that was what he had been looking for and started to escape, hoping that the light beyond that hatch would be sunlight. As soon as he pushed the hatch aside, he was blinded by something. He climbed out of the hole and slowly stood up. He tried to open his eyes and found himself in the middle of a bustling city. The place was lively and all the people seemed to be living their everyday lives. The protagonist told him himself that he had finally managed to escape from there. He stood still, and a bald man asked what he was doing in the middle of the street. He turned around excitedly, saying he had finally found a person. The man was confused by this crazy boy, but then the protagonist stopped to think that it was not the time to focus on that. It was too early to let his guard down, and his father might realize he had escaped. He started running, saying he should distance himself as much as possible from that basement. As he ran, he smiled, thinking that the moment he had been dreaming of had finally arrived. For the first time, he was free. Not long ago, escaping seemed impossible, so he never imagined that the doors would simply open. But then he stopped running and asked himself, why did the doors open? It was impossible for it to be a system malfunction. His father was extremely meticulous and would never make such a mistake. That's when he wondered, what if the opening of the door was intentional? He shook his head, saying no, something like that was impossible, especially since his father was the one who made the rule never to leave that place. He looked around, saw people talking, school children laughing, and a little boy going to get a balloon. He saw the excited boy and his smiling family. The children were running and he felt happy, thinking that it was all right. The boy bumped into someone and the balloon rose. While the protagonist thought that in the end everything his father said was a lie, he realized how peaceful it was outside. This was how life outside the basement was. Everyone there was living a calm life, just as he had hoped. The balloon floated towards the sun. While he thought that an approaching apocalypse made no sense, people were calm. Then everyone felt something strange, and he remembered that his father always said that the end would come without any warning. Suddenly, all the birds in the city began to flee. People looked up confused. The entire city was under a shadow, and behind the balloon, another planet was visible. It covered the sun while everyone looked up confused. Something started to come out of that planet, almost like a virus searching for a host. From the sky, it headed toward the earth. People on the ground said that it seemed to be getting closer. No one had any idea what it was, and someone asked if it might be the moon. The protagonist said it was ridiculous to call it the moon and asked if they weren't seeing what he was seeing. Amidst the advance of that planet, a creature was visible. The protagonist was paralyzed. Besides that creature, there were countless others connected to it. The tangled mass of monsters formed tentacles. They continued advancing, linking with each other until they reached the middle of the city. Never leave the basement. His father always said that was the basic rule of survival. However, there was an exception. If the location of that place was exposed to the enemy, the first creature strangely dove straight into that sewer. The father scratched out the first rule, saying that in the face of great danger, it no longer applied. The security system showed that the doors would be closed as all the creatures ran through the corridors. Outside, the population didn't understand what was happening. An infinite tangle of creatures reached the ground. It all happened so suddenly that no one even reacted. In a second, a blonde guy was grabbed and pulled by one of the creatures. Before he could react, he found himself face to face with the monster's mouth. People just watched as the guy's remains fell in front of everyone. With that, they started screaming and everyone tried to flee. A boy was walking by with headphones on while everyone passed by. He seemed confused and noticed something above him and was immediately crushed. A muscular creature started hurling rocks at everyone, and another with a clawed arm jumped into the crowd, slashing 3 people in one stroke. In that place, no one could escape any of the creatures. The protagonist stood there, not knowing what was happening. People talked about calling the police, but he couldn't react. Then he remembered his father always said that when the apocalypse came, the world would be bathed in blood and the only thing left would be a heap of ashes. The protagonist looked up and saw a creature 3 times taller than a building staring at everyone. The city screamed as one of its steps destroyed half the city. With that, the apocalypse began. A like on this video that helps Mamoru make more juicy content for his viewers, activate the cheeky little bell, and I'm out.